What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Magicka Nightblade. So the Magicka Nightblade is still top of the line when it comes to Magicka DPS. The only class in the game right now that's able to really challenge the Magicka Nightblade for its top contender spot is going to be the Magicka Templar. But even then, the Magicka Templar does have a couple of weaknesses that the Magicka Nightblade doesn't really have. Most importantly, the fact that Magicka Nightblades have a very consistent source of minor berserk through one of their abilities, whereas Magicka Templars are fairly reliant on being able to get Comet Prayer from the healers in order to get that minor berserk. In addition, Magicka Nightblades do also have better sustain than the Magicka Templars, so in that sense, even though Magicka Templars are at least very good Magicka Templars are competitive with Magicka Nightblades, very good Magicka Nightblades will still, typically speaking, be able to outparse a Magicka Templar. So if you're looking to play a Magicka class, then the Nightblade is going to be the best class for you. That being said though, the Nightblade is also notorious for having one of the most difficult rotations to master, so that's kind of the trade-off here. You get very high DPS, but it is a very difficult class to master as well. So for this build video, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. When we're talking about our gear, I will be going over a couple of different gear substitutions that you might want to make depending on which DLCs, expansions you have access to, whether you have time to farm or you just want to get something quick and dirty and just kind of get your hands right into trials. So I will be going over some gear substitutions here. I'll be talking about a rotation, particularly for Magicka Nightblades, because it's a very heavy emphasis on having a very dynamic rotation, so I will go over what the rotation will look like, what a dynamic rotation means, and kind of what you should be doing in your rotation. And then we'll close off with the 6-man dummy Parse so you guys can get an idea of the amount of DPS that you're able to pull on a Magicka Nightblade. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started first here with our gear. So in terms of our gear, this has pretty much remained more or less unchanged from Murkmire over to Wrathstone. There have been no sets that have been introduced that have really kind of replaced the current meta sets. So for Monster Helm, we're going with Zaan. We're still going the 5-1-1, so that's 5 light, 1 heavy, 1 medium. So our Monster Helm set is 1 heavy and 1 medium because our armor sets are going to be light armor. So we can't really use body pieces in order to kind of fill in that gap there. We have Zaan. Zaan does come from Scalecaller Peak, so that is a DLC dungeon. You will need to have access to Dragon Bones in order to use this set. So if you don't have access to Zaan, then you do have 2 other options when it comes to Monster Helm sets. So Zaan is definitely going to be the strongest option here. There is one caveat that you have to basically be within melee range, within that 8-meter radius for it to proc. So if you can't play at range, then Zaan will not be the best option for you because you'll never be able to get it to proc. First Monster Helm set that you might want to consider running is going to be Skoria. This is a base game set that you can get from City of Ash 2. The one piece adds max health, which isn't all too useful for DPS, but the 2 piece pretty much deals a big hit of damage, so it's 13,410 flame damage in this particular instance to the target. As long as you deal damage with the damage over time ability. So this is a very nice set to run when you're at range. It's going to out DPS Lambris, which is the other potential Monster Helm set that you might want to consider running. Skoria will, typically speaking, out DPS Lambris in most scenarios. So if you have to play at range, then Skoria is going to be the next best option. If you want to play at melee range, but you don't have access to Zaan, because you don't have the Dragon Bones DLC, for instance, then you can go with Grothar instead. Grothar can be obtained from Vault of Madness, base game dungeon, fairly easy dungeon to do. The 1 piece adds max magicka, so that does add to your DPS. The 2 piece is one of the strongest base game Monster Helm sets in the game. So it is, again, reliant on being within melee range. It has an 8-meter radius, very similar to Zaan. It is weaker than Zaan, but it is the strongest Monster Helm set for base game users who are able to play within melee range. So those are kind of your Monster Helm set options there. Now, for your body set, Siroria is going to be the best option for you. So I have the perfect version here. You can go with the imperfect version. The perfect version and the imperfect version, the only difference is that additional max magicka armor bonus on that 5 piece. So the perfect version does drop from Vet Cloud Rest +1 and above, so you will need to have a group that's able to clear Vet Cloud Rest +1 in order to be able to get this set. If you're not able to get this set, then you can run the imperfect version. That's perfectly fine there. So you will need to be able to run Cloud Rest in order to get this set, so you will need to have access to the Somerset expansion. Now, obviously, if you don't have access to Somerset expansion, you do have a couple of gear substitutions. So the first substitution I'm going to be talking about is going to be Burning Spellweave. This is a base game set that you can get from City of Ash, so you can either farm it from City of Ash 1 or City of Ash 2. So it is a fairly decent set. It's probably one of the weaker sets when it comes to replacements. Probably only Julian's is probably weaker than Burning Spellweave. But Burning Spellweave is still a pretty nice set to have. It's at the very least, it's very consistent. So Burning Spellweave is definitely a set that I would recommend picking up. It used to be the meta way back in Homestead, and it has continued to be a fairly strong set. So I would recommend farming this set regardless, in case it ever does end up becoming more powerful in the future. Another body set that you might want to consider running. It's going to be Master Architect. So Master Architect, you can also run this on the front bar if you would like, but that's kind of up to you how you want to play with that. If you're going to be running Master Architect, obviously you will not be running Siroria, because then you'll be doubling down on Minor Slayer, so Minor Slayer doesn't stack on each other, so you're basically wasting a armor set bonus there. So you would be using Master Architect in place of Siroria here. So this is a light armor set that can be found in Halls of Fabrication. So you will need to have access to Vardenfell / the Morrowind expansion in order to get this set here. It's a very powerful group utility set because it gives Major Slayer to your two closest allies. So if you're able to land that on 2 DPS, those 2 DPS will get that Major Slayer buff for 10 seconds, which is a pretty powerful buff for the group DPS. You will eat a little bit of a DPS loss if you're going to be using Master Architect compared to using Siroria, but it is worth it because your group DPS will increase as a result of using Master Architect. Like I mentioned, you can use Master Architect as a front bar set, so you can have it on the front bar here if you so desire. The last kind of set that I want to talk about for a front body set is going to be Mother Sorrow. This is a light armor set that you can get from the Shan, so you can farm it or you can buy it off of guild traders. So that's kind of the advantage of running Mother Sorrow. It just adds a lot of spell crit, which plays very nicely to the additional crit damage that Nightblades have. So very easy set to obtain, fairly cheap to buy off of guild traders if you just are looking for the body pieces, and very, very powerful, still very strong ever since Horns of the Reach. Now the 5-piece is a static bonus, so you will need to wear this on the body here. One other set that I mentioned earlier that I don't have on hand because it is a crafted set is going to be Julianos. So Julianos is a crafted set from Hrothgar, so you can buy it off of guild traders, you can craft it yourself, or you can get somebody to craft it for you. It requires 6 traits to be known in whatever piece you want to wear. Very similar to Mother Sorrow, it does have a static 5-piece, so you want to wear it on the body. It provides 299 spell damage when completely golded out when you have that 5-piece bonus. So it's a very consistent set. It's one of the best beginner sets in the game for Magicka DPS. It is outclassed by the other sets that I've kind of gone over here, but it is still a very consistent set. It's a very easy set to obtain for those of you guys who are just starting to create your Magicka Nightblade here. Now, your front bar set is going to be Spell Strategist. So Spell Strategist is definitely going to be a very strong set. A lot of the sets that I just mentioned are typically going to be paired with Spell Strategist. So Spell Strategist is a PvP set. So you can get this from Wards of the Worthy. So whenever you get 20,000 AP, you get a Wards of the Worthy coffer, whether that's from Cyrodiil or Battlegrounds, and it has a chance of dropping some Spell Strategist pieces. A Spell Strategist piece, I should say. So Spell Strategist is going to be a front bar set, so you're going to want to have the jewelry or armor, depending on what set you're running. You might have jewelry in your second set, so you can run jewelry there. Spell Strategist is a light armor set, so you can run it on the body, no problem at all. But you definitely want to have the Inferno staff for the front bar for Spell Strategist. So this is probably going to be the hardest piece to find because it is a weapon, so you either have to farm Cyrodiil or Battlegrounds and hope you get lucky with the coffers, or you can buy it for a princely sum off of guild traders. But Spell Strategist is going to be the strongest front bar set in the game. Like I mentioned earlier, pretty much all the other sets that I was talking about earlier are paired with Spell Strategist here, just because Spell Strategist is just such a powerful buff here. Now for traits and enchants, on our armor pieces, I have all divines and all max Magicka enchants. You can go with Infused on your large pieces if you so desire, but divines will give you a little bit more flexibility when it comes to Mundus Stone, because you do have 2 main Mundus Stone options here. For our jewelry, we have 3 Bloodthirsty and 3 spell damage. You can go with Infused as your jewelry trait as well. Infused does end up beating out Arcane in terms of pure DPS. Arcane is not necessarily a bad choice. It does give you more max Magicka, so you're able to sustain a little bit better because now you have more resources to play around with. But typically speaking, Infused will out DPS Arcane. So you can go with any real combination between Bloodthirsty and Infused. 3 times Bloodthirsty is typically going to give you the highest DPS bonus, but there are some fights in the game where you're going to want to run Infused rather than Bloodthirsty, or I should say you want 2 or 1 pieces of Infused with Bloodthirsty. All spell damage enchants, where Nightblade we don't have real issues with sustain at all. For our front bar, we're going with Infused with the Flame Damage enchant, and for our back bar, we have an Infused Shock Damage enchant. So Magicka Nightblades do have very nice sustain, so you are able to sustain a Shock Damage enchant on the back bar. You don't necessarily need to run an Absorb Magicka enchant on the back bar here. If you are in a situation where you need additional cleave damage, so let's say you're running Maw of Lorcage, you're running Halls of Fabrication, and you do have an additional Maelstrom Inferno staff to play around with, you can use a weapon damage enchant instead. Shock damage will give you more single target DPS compared to the Berserker enchant, the weapon damage enchant, but the weapon damage enchant does give you a little bit more cleave just because it does boost your spell damage compared to just doing flat damage like the shock damage enchant does. And of course, if you do need additional sustain, feel free to run an Absorb Magicka enchant on the back bar instead to help out your sustain. So that's it for our gear options here. Let's go over our character sheet. So I am a High Elf. High Elves are going to give you the best DPS out of all the different Magicka races. You do have a couple of other options though when it comes to Magicka race. The Dark Elves, the Dunmer, are a close second, while the High Elves get 2000 max Magicka and 258 spell damage. Dunmer get 1875 spell max Magicka and 258 spell damage, so very close behind there. The Bretons are another option. Bretons do get 7% cost reduction on all magic abilities, so coupled with the Nightblade's naturally very high sustain, and with a Breton Nightblade you can pretty much run blue food and never need to worry of running out of Magicka. So Breton sustain is very powerful, which can make up for the loss in spell damage just because you don't necessarily need a heavy attack on a Breton as often or at all compared to running like a High Elf or a Dark Elf. Bretons also do get 2,000 additional max Magicka. And finally, Khajiits are another potential option you might want to consider running. They get 10% additional crit damage, so that does help out your damage a little bit, and they get 825 Magicka stamina and health, so that additional health does give you a little bit of additional survivability. The stamina does give you a little bit more kind of leeway when it comes to using break free or blocking or dodge rolling and things like that. They don't get quite as much max Magicka, and the crit damage bonus is not as strong as the spell damage bonus. And generally speaking, Bretons, the sustain does allow them to fully sustain light attack rotation, so they do end up out DPSing Khajiits, but Khajiits are an option if you do want to play those. So High Elves will give you the highest DPS if you do want to be just a pure Magicka Nightblade. If you want to kind of swap back and forth between Magicka and stamina, you can go with the Dark Elves, because Dark Elves also get 1875 stamina and 258 weapon damage. So if you want to kind of go back and forth, Dark Elves are a good option as well. Attributes, 64 points into Magicka. You can shift a couple of points into health if you would like. I personally would not recommend putting more than 10 points into health, because at that point you're kind of giving up a little bit too much when it comes to max Magicka. For our Mundus Stone, we're going with the Thief. So when you're not running Mother's Sorrow, the Thief is going to be a little bit stronger than the Shadow. If you are going to be running Mother's Sorrow, then you will want to run the Shadow instead, and that's just because the higher your crit chance is, the stronger the Shadow becomes. And when you have Mother's Sorrow, that's kind of when you hit that tipping point where Shadow is going to be a little bit stronger when you pair it with Mother's Sorrow. But for most other set combinations, if you're not running Mother's Sorrow, then the Thief is going to give you a little bit more DPS than the Shadow. But you can go with the Shadow. The DPS difference between the two of them, if you're not running Mother's Sorrow, is actually fairly small. Probably not all that noticeable in raid scenarios. For food, for the purposes of the Parse, we are going to be running Ice Cream. So this is Ghastly Eyeball. This basically replicates getting orbs on cooldown. So this basically is sort of like blue food with orbs. So this is just kind of a demonstration of sustain that you would be able to get if you just had orb sustain. Now, in an actual raid environment, you might be able to sustain blue food as a High Elf or a Dark Elf. You might need a heavy attack here and there. To be safe, you can run Witchmother's Potent Brew or Clockwork Citrus Fillet as a High Elf or a Dark Elf in order to get that additional Magicka regen. But you will be giving up health and max Magicka, but the additional regen will basically allow you to fully sustain light attack rotation for the duration of the trial. Now, if you are a Breton, you should be able to sustain blue food, full light attack rotation, as long as you're getting good orb support. So those are kind of your three food options there: blue food, Witchmothers, or Clockwork Citrus Fillet. Now, going over our skill bars. Starting off with our front bar, we have Impale, Elemental Weapon. You can replace Elemental Weapon for Swallow Soul if you don't have access to the Sigic skill line here. Swallow Soul is also going to be very useful in instances where you need the additional self-heal. So for example, in Cloud Rest, potentially in Asylum, you might want to have more self-heals compared to running just pure Elemental Weapon, which is just pure damage there. So Swallow Soul is definitely an ability that I would recommend taking a look at as well. It is a little bit more expensive, it deals about the same amount of damage, but Elemental Weapon is going to give you a little bit more damage overall. Crippling Grasp, Merciless Resolve, Inner Light, and Soul Harvest. On our back bar, we had, this is where we would put our shield. I have Elemental Drain for the purposes of the Parse, so you would normally put any more of Annulment. Dampen Magic for the larger shield, or Harness Magicka to restore magic whenever you take spell damage. Then we have Twisting Path, Blockade of Fire, Siphoning Attacks, Rearming Trap. You can also use, if you have access to this ability, you can use Channel Acceleration instead. This is also going to be more useful if you are not able to be within melee range, because you do have to be within melee range in order to make use of Rearming Trap. And then we have Soul Harvest again. Now going over our champion points, the CP cap has not changed between Murkmire and Wrathstone, so you still have 810 CP as your cap, which gives us 270 points to put across each of the 3 different constellation colors. So starting off with our green CPs, I have 100 Arcanas and 100 Tenacity here, which gives me 70 points to play around with the rest of the nodes, so 20 Shadow Ward, 20 Tumbling, 30 Warlord. You can drop these down to 75 if you'd like, so to give you up to 14 instead of 15, which will give you basically another 50 points to play around with, so then you can push Shadow Ward Tumbling up to 40, and Warlord up to 40 as well. Now for our blue CPs, I have 66 into Elfborn, 64 into Elemental Expert, 25 into Spell Erosion, 9 into Staff Expert, 72 into Master at Arms, and 34 into Thaumaturge. Regardless of which Mundus you choose, this is probably going to be the best CP distribution. Even if there is a slightly better CP distribution, adjusting your CP is probably not going to give you all that much of a DPS increase. It's probably going to give you at most maybe like a quarter percentage point increase. And finally, our red CPs. So for those of you guys who have followed my build videos for a while now, you know that this is a more balanced approach to content. This will give you very good mitigation across all pieces of content, but it will not maximize your mitigation against any single piece of content. So if you're running something like Malvlar Kaj, for instance, then you will want to adjust your CPs to basically maximize the mitigation for that particular trial. So I have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thickskin, and 64 into Hardy and Elemental Defender. Alright, so that is pretty much it for all the build information you guys are going to need to know. So now let's go ahead and talk about our rotation here. So like I mentioned earlier in the video, Magicka Nightblades are have a very high emphasis on doing a dynamic rotation. If you want to maximize your DPS as a Magicka Nightblade, you pretty much have to stick with a dynamic rotation. And part of it is because your dots do have differing lengths, so Blockade lasts for 8 seconds for example, Twisting Path lasts for about 12 seconds, and Crippling Grasp lasts for 8 seconds. So there's a little bit of dynamic rotation as a result of just your duration of your dots and things like that. But the big reason why we have our dynamic rotation is because of Merciless Resolve. So when you hit an enemy, when you hit 5 light attacks in a row, or not in a row, but when you get 5 light attacks off, you have a Spectral Bow, and this deals a lot of damage. You can see right here it deals 20,509 damage before any of our buffs are active. So it's a very, very strong ability, so you want to make sure to get that off as soon as you can. Because as long as you have that bow proc active and you're not using it, you will not be able to build stacks up for the second one. So if you were to do 10 light attacks but not use your bow proc, you will only get 1 bow proc, you will not get 2. So it's very important that you get this bow proc off as soon as you can. And as a result of this, you will have a dynamic rotation because you might have to use the bow proc when you're on your back bar, in which case you would basically bar swap, use the bow proc, and then finish off reapplying your dots on your back bar here. So that's really the reason why dynamic rotation is really key for Magicka Nightblades. On top of the fact that dynamic rotations basically allow you to maximize your dot uptime, basically kind of minimize your overall magical loss and maximize your DPS that way. A static rotation will typically have you overcast a dot or 2, which is going to be a small DPS loss. So even if we didn't have this bow proc kind of factor in, the dynamic rotation will give you a little bit more DPS than a static rotation, even though it is going to be harder to learn as a result. So, as you can imagine, you want to prioritize getting this bow proc off as soon as you can. Beyond that, your primary dots are going to be Blockade of Fire and Twisting Path. You want to try to maintain Rearming Trap or Channel Acceleration for the minor force uptime. Siphoning attacks is going to be more important to maintain if you are a high elf, a dark elf, or a Khajiit. If you are a Breton, you can let this drop off for a little bit here, but if you are any of the other races that I mentioned, you do want to try to maintain siphoning attacks for the additional sustain. This is the reason why Magicka Nightblades do have such great sustain. It's because of siphoning attacks, so you just want to make sure to keep that up. And then you want to make sure you're maintaining Merciless Resolve as well. Crippling Grasp, if you can maintain it, go right ahead, but if you have to drop it for whatever reason, you have to play mechanics or anything like that, or you need to get a bow proc off, it's okay if you let it drop off. That's perfectly fine to make do of. Soul Harvest, you want to try to time this so that way you can use Soul Harvest right before a bow proc. Typically speaking, you'll only be able to get one bow proc off for each Soul Harvest use, but that's kind of the goal. You want to make sure to get at least one bow proc off when you have that Soul Harvest active there. Then when you get into Execute, you don't want to use Elemental Weapon anymore. You will drop Crippling Grasp. Some people will drop Siphoning Attacks. It's kind of up to you how long Execute is, how good your sustain is, what your resource level at, things like that. And they will only use Blockade of Fire. So for Execute, you typically drop Crippling Grasp, Twisting Path, and you will maintain Blockade of Fire. You might drop Siphoning depending on your resource management, and you want to maintain Merciless Resolve for that Minor Berserk there. So here's kind of a demonstration of kind of like what I mean by a dynamic rotation. Typically you want to just make sure you're pre-buff. So you can see here you want to get that bow proc off as soon as it procs. I'm at 4, 5 bow proc. Make sure to reapply your Merciless before if you think it's going to run out. You can see here I did allow Triple to drop off a little bit there. So 4 bar swap over the bow proc and so on and so forth. So that's kind of the dynamic rotation here. So when we do our 6-man dummy parse, you'll notice that I might not necessarily be doing the same rotation that I just did here, the same order of abilities. And that's just because, again, I am going to prioritize getting that bow proc off. I might miss a light attack here and there. So as long as I prioritize getting that bow proc off as soon as I can, that is the main thing that I have to try to maintain here. So let's go ahead and do our 6-man dummy test so you guys can get an idea of the DPS that we're able to pull here. Now, one thing to keep in mind here, if you want to compare a Magicka Nightblade parse to some other classes, is the fact that Magicka Nightblades do have Minor Berserk built into their skill sets. So Merciless Resolve gives us Minor Berserk, so we do have a little bit of a higher parse compared to other self-buff parses on other classes. So just bear that in mind when you take a look at this particular parse here. So let's go ahead and get started here, and I will try to kind of narrate through any sort of major points. So the idea behind getting that bow proc off is when you're at 4, light attack right into activating the Merciless Resolve ability. Don't be too fast, because sometimes if you're too fast, you'll actually end up reapplying Merciless Resolve rather than using your bow proc. That's happened to me a few times when I'm a little bit too fast. With that bow proc activation. Make sure to reapply it if you don't think you're going to be able to like apply all your backfire dots before it runs out. Bow proc. So I applied Crippling Grasp there because I still had about a second left on my Blockade. Again, I kind of want to maximize my Blockade uptime. Should have bar swap there instead of going for the Rearming Trap. So we hit 25% here. Remember, we're dropping Triple, we're dropping Path, we're only maintaining Blockade now. Want to make sure also maintaining Rearming Trap or Challenge Acceleration for the Minor Berserk. We do want to try to maintain Merciless Resolve here. Alright, and there we go. That is our 6-man dummy Parse on a high elf Magicka Nightblade. Now you did notice that towards the end of the Parse I was running low on Magicka, so that's what I was talking about when, as a high elf, you might want to run Witchman's Potent Brew or Clockwork Stitches Fillet instead to get that additional Magicka regen. If we have that, along with Orb, you should be able to sustain a full light attack rotation for the duration of your fight here. So that's not what you guys want to see. So here is our DPS. We pulled 53.8k. So again, bear in mind, we do have Minor Berserk here, and we are using a shock damage enchant, so our minor vulnerability uptime is something that you do want to take note of here when you want to compare to other Magicka DPS classes here. So we do have a little bit of a better Parse overall because of that Minor Berserk, because we have that shock damage enchant, although other classes can also run shock damage enchants on the back bar as well. So that's just something you want to keep in mind when you're comparing damage. The bow proc, again, as you can see here, is a very strong max crit that we got was 56,733. And Impale, which is our execute move, is a very powerful move. You can see here, this is a self-buff test, so we're not getting things like Minor Sorcery, we're not at pen cap, we don't have Major Slayer from somebody maybe using Master Architect with us, and we're already hitting 74.3k as our max. And this is not even considering potentially, let's say we want to use a Shadow, where we'd be able to get even higher crit hits with Impale here. So Impale is one of the reasons why Magicka Nightblades are such a powerful class. You can get very, very high hits with Impale, and it's on one global cooldown. It's not like Jesus Beam, where you have to channel it for 2 seconds. You just basically spam Impale during execute, and it's a very, very strong ability there. So that is it for this build video. If you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.